It's straight down the line for both of us. Remember?
There was a kind of purity. He was at home being an actor. He didn't take it too seriously, though.
There was a great deal of Fred and his persona in each of the characters he played, and I think that's why he was so attractive to people on the screen, and why he was able to play with so many of the top leading ladies over a period of decades.
When My Three Sons came on, there was nothing like Fred MacMurray on TV. If you compared it to today, it would be like somebody saying, oh, guess what, we got a series this season, and it's starring Robert Redford.
The main thing about MacMurray was that he never considered himself a star. He didn't have to put that on, and that's what made him a wonderful character. Every part he played the guy next door.
He was easy, he was friendly, but he was not intimate. He did not let you come this close, just this close. Nice, friendly, small-town boy. If there was pain in his life, if there was tragedy, he didn't ever reveal that.
My grandfather was visiting Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. He was doing a concert there. He was a very fine concert violinist, and he fell in love with, she was the most popular girl in Beaver Dam, Melita Martin. She was beautiful, stunningly beautiful. They were immediately attracted to one another. They weren't allowed to see each other because my grandmother's family were very opposed to her seeing a musician, but they eventually did elope and were married. And she traveled with him all during her pregnancy and ended up in Kankakee, Illinois, where my father was born on August 30th, 1908. There came a time, I think, when they were having some financial difficulties, so it was easier for my grandmother to take my father back home to Beaver Dam, where she had a very good support system. And she stayed with her mother and her sister. Those first few years, my grandfather was on the road. He traveled and wrote. The level of disapproval that my grandmother's family had, I think ultimately, is what separated them and pulled them apart. My father heard from his father occasionally, but he died when my father was 5 years old.
He never really spoke too much about his father because he didn't know that much about him, except was so interesting. One time we were sitting here and watching a concert on television, and this marvelous violinist came, and he had this dreamy look in his eyes, and I looked at him, and he had a tear there, and he said, "He looks like my dad." And he said, "He's playing the same tune that I remember my father rehearsing." And I said, "Do you miss him?" He said, "I miss being his son." I really didn't know what a father was.
He never had an affinity to the violin, much, I think, to his father's dismay. But he did love music, and he grew up around music, and his family was very, very musical. So he started out playing a saxophone. He loved the sax, he loved the sound of it, and you have to remember the era in which he grew up, too. It was, you know, the jazz bands and the jazz music, and they had the speakeasies and all that kind of thing. So Dad started out playing a musical instrument in his high school band, and then later on he played in the college band at Carroll College, and supported himself that first year by playing in local bands and nightclubs. Much to, I think, his mother's horror. He loved it, and he loved playing the saxophone, and that's actually how he got started in the entertainment field. All the odd jobs that he had when he worked his way across the country, working in a department store and selling electrical appliances and taking the paint off old cars. He used to do that.
Fred MacMurray never took acting lessons. He was in a band, a performing band in those days. It was called the California Collegians, none of whom was from California. They did like vaudeville acts and skits, and he learned his timing that way.
He actually was the only one in that band that knew how to read music, and he would play it once for them, and they learned by ear how to follow along all the songs they had to learn. And his musical career led him eventually to Broadway. He was a musician in two different shows, Three's a Crowd and Roberta. And in Roberta, he actually had a line. They needed a tall guy to walk across the stage and to listen to a Libby Holman song, and his response to her song was, "How you doing, baby?" or "Come on home, baby," or something like that. He would do the shtick and then go back in the pit. That was his first experience as an entertainer.
Oddly enough, he was brought to Paramount, and his first picture was not here. RKO borrowed him immediately for a picture.
And it was called Grand Old Girl. And he had a scene in the football stadium in the stands where he had to eat popcorn. And Wesley Ruggles was looking for a new leading man for Claudette Colbert in her new picture called The Gilded Lily, and they needed a leading man that could eat popcorn. So they took a look at the Rushes, and they agreed that he was the guy for them. So he got the part actually because he ate popcorn very nicely.
But popcorn was made for watching the world go by. Look, I stick my hand in the bag without taking my eyes off the street. I throw some popcorn in my craw, I chew, and I'm still looking. That's what I call class.
Sure, peanut eaters don't know how to live.
Fred was that natural with it. And when that picture came out, Claudette was already a big star, and he just exploded on the screen.
He just was himself. And I think that's why people liked him so much, because he was himself, and that came through.
We could go away someplace, to the mountains maybe, where you could get some rest. And then, well, oh, Lynn, I know I'm just a mug, no class, not even a crease in my pants, but do you know what I'm trying to say? Well, how do you feel about it?
He brought a naturalness and a charm and a unique kind of sophistication, I think, that made that whole picture come alive. And from that day on, when that film was released, he was an instant star.
And then when he did Alice Adams with Katharine Hepburn, he showed that he could hold the screen with her. But I think that's what immediately showed the people at Paramount that this man had potential.
He was used to being with gentle people, mostly women. And in the formative years, he became very attuned to how important it was to be gentle with women. And he was a very tender, kind person. When he started working with Carole Lombard and some of the big stars, the women that were great stars and aggressive and career women.
Not only the fact that he was a good actor did they want him, but they wanted him because of his naturalness. He put them at ease, appearing in scenes with him.
They loved working with Fred MacMurray, the big actresses of the time, because they knew he wouldn't try to take over. They knew that he would be sort of in second place and be in second place very, very well without thinking he was in second place. He didn't in any way try to outdo anybody else ever in his life, because what he did was simple and straightforward and good enough to shine.
All the women in Hollywood wanted to be his leading lady. Claudette Colbert did pictures with him. Madeleine Carroll did 3 or 4 pictures with him. Paulette Goddard did pictures with him.
All these gorgeous girls. He used to say to me, He said, I don't want to get in trouble with my leading ladies, but he said the one that was the most fun to work with was Carole. I said, why? Carole Lombard. He said, well, you just never knew what she was going to do or say.
Hello? Hey, you, I said hello.
Say, you weren't speaking to me by any chance.
No, on purpose.
You know, soldiers on sentry duty aren't supposed to talk.
What can they do to me? They can fire me. All right, I've already quit. I'm all washed up with the Army. This is my last day. Say, there's an idea. We ought to celebrate.
Yeah, the Army will probably do the celebrating.
Say, is the rest of you as beautiful as your face?
No, I weigh 200 pounds and I don't wear shoes.
Perfect. What should we do tonight? How about meeting you on the dock under the moon?
But if there isn't a moon.
I'll meet you under the dock. No kidding. How about you and me going places tonight when your boat gets in? Okay?
No kidding, how about you scramming so I can see some of the scenery down here?
I am the scenery down here. I'm Skid Johnson, the one-man army. Ask anybody.
It's been delightful, Mr. Johnson. Now go away. You bother me.
Thank you so much. Honey, I didn't think you'd admit it. I'll meet you on the dock at Balboa. Hey, I'll be wearing my civvies and I'll wear a carnation in my buttonhole so you know me.
I wouldn't know you if you wore a rose behind your ear.
That's an idea.
With Carole Lombard, Fred was the perfect kind of sounding board for her amazing comic abilities. She was always the wacky, though beautiful kind of woman. And he was also quite funny in those roles.
What's the matter? Don't you like music?
Music? Of course I like music, but that isn't music. It's a... Well, of course I like music. Violins, that's what I like. Violins. Soft, sweet, and romance.
There's no romance in a trumpet.
Romance in a trumpet?
What you mean is you don't like trumpets.
I don't like trumpets.
This was during the era of the Depression, so people really wanted to be entertained and taken away from the problems and misfortunes that they were dealing with.
She had a run in her stocking. He didn't have a nickel in his pocket, but they merrily put their trust in the generous bounty of Lady Luck in the dream city of the world, New York town.
If you just go to the library... Oh, you don't have to worry about her. She's used to rough stuff. After 6 months with me.
Why, you hound, you don't believe that, do you?
He does believe it. Oh, you do. Oh. I knew that guy was so good.
You'd have thought between takes he'd be a comedian and everything, but he wasn't. He was very serious. But he had the timing that was so great.
He was a very expert musician and sax player. I wonder if that kind of inner sense of rhythm and sense of the cadence of language and especially comedy was somewhere just built within him.
In long about August, we can begin to figure out more important offspring.
Oh, darling.
Maybe 500 or 600 of them.
500 or 600 what?
Well, chicks, of course.
He kept to himself to a great deal without seeming to be out of it. He was like that. But he was always friendly. He never held you off at arm's length, but at the same time, you couldn't get to him because of his, he had a protective quality, like a layer of varnish all over him that kept people from boring in.
He was a very kind person, not only to his co-stars and his co-workers, but to the people outside. I've seen him leave the studio. They'd take their turn coming up and he'd autograph whatever it was for them. I think he was always appreciative of the fact of what good fortune had happened to him. At one time, I guess he thought he was going to be a musician all of his life, and then suddenly He's brought to a major studio and becomes a major leading man, one of the biggest in the business.
I remember once I said, Fred, I said, what do you think that would have happened to you if you hadn't become an actor and gone to Hollywood and become such a success? And he said, he said, I'd be selling shoes back there. He said, obviously, and I might even own my own shoe store.
In 1936, Fred MacMurray married Lillian Lamont. She was a model and an actress, and he had first met her in the Broadway musical Roberta.
She was just the opposite from me. She was tall, brunette, very elegant.
In time, they would adopt 2 children, Susan and Robert. And Fred MacMurray had what he had always sought, a family of his own in which there was an ever-present father.
I understand I'm to do a little flying for you gentlemen.
You gonna be the pilot?
You can't feel any worse about it than I do, Lieutenant. She's sluggish on the controls. Too much ice. Give me oxygen.
During the war years, Fred, I think, very well took care of a big problem that Hollywood had, which was that a number of the leading men had gone into the service. So there was a paucity of the leading men of Fred MacMurray's stature. He made Americans, again, I think, feel good about the masculine figures that they valued so much during that time.
Many of you out there are strangers to one another, but we all have one thing in common. We invested our money in America.
My father had tried to get into the service, but a punctured eardrum had kept him out. So he remained in Hollywood, but he did what he could to help the war effort, even after the war. Together with other members of the Hollywood community, he did his part in helping in the process of rebuilding.
Today, victory bonds must play their part in peace, in bringing our boys home, in rehabilitating the disabled, hospitalizing the wounded, in giving all the veterans a break. And we must invest in our own tomorrow by buying victory bonds today.
He never got caught up in the trappings of Hollywood, and I think all of that came from the Midwestern beginnings and, the solid input that he had from his family. And I think he didn't get caught up with all of that. That wasn't important to him. Family was important to him. Doing a good job was important to him.
I think a lot of actresses too, who are shy, get really turned on when they can become somebody else, use their imagination and act. He was a very shy person, personally.
My father never took an acting class, but he believed if you believed who you were, the character you were playing, if you knew your lines, and you listened to what the other person was saying to you and responded, that was it.
He always could say things, say lines, as though they were absolutely spontaneous, as though he just thought of them. And that, of course, is a great trick if you can manage it. He was one of those, what I call an honest actor.
He was a self-contained person. That's highly unusual for an actor. Usually, actors are far more vulnerable. They want to know, what do you think of me? Well, what did you think of that scene? Did you really laugh? Did you really think it was that funny?
He had inner strength. He was very strong. He was silent. He didn't want to let people in on what he was thinking all the time. And I think definitely that came across on screen.
Fred did have some things in common with the Gary Coopers, the John Waynes, the Randolph Scotts. He had the physicality. He was a big man, a strapping, strong man. He also had that kind of reserve, that laid-back quality about him. What he did have that many of them didn't have was a range. You can't truly imagine John Wayne or Gary Cooper doing Walter Neff in Double Indemnity.
We were making a picture, a very daring picture,
where leading man and leading lady are murderers. I showed the script to Stanwyck, and she immediately said yes, she wanted to do it because she knew that was a juicy part. She didn't want to play goody-goody parts. But I had difficulties with leading man. The leading man in those days, they did not want to play a murderer. I went all the way down to George Raft, who said, I can't play it because when you were reading that script to me, he says, no, that I'm an FBI man. I said, no, that's not the kind of picture, not that. So I had nobody until I found on the list of the contractually obligated actors, until I started thinking about Fred MacMurray, who was a Paramount actor. And I let him read the script, and he says, I can't do it. He said, that beautiful line, he says, this requires acting. I says, yes, it will, and you will be wonderful in it. He says, look, for God's sake, I know how to play the saxophone. That's how they found me. And I'm doing those little comedies with Claudette Colbert, and please don't do it to me. I did it to him, he played it, and he was wonderful.
I killed Dietrichson. Me, Walter Neff, insurance agent, 35 years old, unmarried, no visible scars. Until a while ago, that is. Yeah, I killed him. I killed him for money and for a woman. How do you do, Mr. Dietrichson? I'm Walter Neff, Pacific All Risk.
If you wait till I put something on, I'll be right down.
The insurance ran out on the 15th. I'd hate to think of you having a smashed fender or something while you're not fully covered. You want to knock him off, don't you?
That's a horrible thing to say.
What'd you think I was, anyway? The guy that walks into a good-looking dame's front parlor and says, good afternoon, I sell accident insurance on husbands? You got one that's been around too long, one you'd like to turn into a little hard cash? Just give me a smile and I'll help you collect? Boy, what a dope you must think I am.
I think you're rotten.
Double Indemnity was a real leap of faith for Fred MacMurray. It was a dangerous, dangerous decision on his part to take that role because he was already very well established as the solid, heroic, leading man type at that point. He had never played a villain before.
I can't stand it anymore. What if they do hang me?
They're not going to hang you, baby.
It's better than going on this way.
They're not going to hang you. Because you're going to do it and I'm going to help you. You know why you couldn't figure this one, Keys? I'll tell you. Because the guy you were looking for was too close. He was right across the desk from you.
Closer than that, Walter.
I love you, too.
It was a wonderful boost to him to know that he could portray that kind of character and to portray it beautifully. And having accomplished it, I think he actually felt better about himself as a performer. Now he could do anything.
Fred MacMurray was devastated when his first wife died of cancer. And those of us who knew him tried to comfort him as much as we could. But actually, the most comforting thing that Fred had was himself. He was a very strong person, and although he grieved and was devastated by this loss, he managed to control himself and to continue his work. As if anything, I think he worked harder.
He didn't want to do it in a way, but we talked him into it because we told him it would be better for him. You know, the old thing, if he worked, that if he worked, it would help him to ease the pain.
What's up?
I have just relieved the captain. He will continue to be treated with the utmost courtesy, but from now on, I will give all orders. Mr. Keith backed you up. He'll play the same as you will.
Queeg is a paranoid, or there's no such thing as paranoia.
Tom, I warned you.
Can't you see what he's doing?
Queeg was sick. He couldn't help himself. But you're real healthy. Only you didn't have 1/10 the guts that he had.
Except I never fooled myself, Mr. Greenwald. I can see 6 sides to every risk and 12 reasons why I shouldn't take it.
Cut the kidding, Tom.
Look, fellas, behind this smiling, brilliant, eloquent exterior, I've got a yellow streak 15 miles wide. I'm too smart to be brave.
You'll publish your novel. You'll make $1 million. You marry a big movie star. And for the rest of your life, you'll live with your conscience. If you have any. Now, here's to the real author of the Caine Mutiny. Here's to you, Mr. Kiefer.
I never believe in having heavies who play heavies. They don't think they're heavies. They think they're as nice and as decent as anybody else, except they have a different way of looking at life.
The first time I met Fred MacMurray, I was 18 years old, and he was 36. And we were appearing in a film together called, prophetically, Where Do We Go From Here?
My lucky star was glowing. All at once I knew I'd met my once for all.
Lucilla. Lucilla, darling, speak to me. All my life I've wanted you to sit on my lap, but it's no fun if you're not conscious.
I used to come home and tell my mother, gosh, it's too bad he's happily married. That's the kind of man I would like to have. And she said, why? I said, well, he's so real. He's kind. He's not full of himself. Brings his lunch in a paper bag, eats by himself. He's kind of a loner, but very sweet and kind. And you know, Mom, every day he calls home and talks to his wife and his 2 children, and why can't I find somebody like that?
June Haver in her own right was a big star at Fox. A lot of important pictures.
I worked in films for about 10 years in the golden age of musicals and having lots of fun growing up.
Balance yourself like a bird on the beam in the air. She goes, there she goes. Oh, you beautiful God. Diana, prepare the wedding wine. Every one girl in my hair.
With all of this stardom and adulation she had, she decided to give it all up and go into a convent.
I went into the convent for very personal reasons. And I came out a year later for very personal reasons. When Lillian died and left him with his son and daughter, he was like a lost soul. And it was only about 6 or 8 months after the Caine Mutiny that he went to the party that John Wayne gave. John Wayne called. He said, Junie, I've got to get you out in the public again. You've been in the convent, and I want you to come to a costume party I'm having. I said, oh, Duke, I'm not up to it. He said, well, I'm not asking you to come as a nun. Just go and rent a costume. So I talked it over with my mother, and she said, go. So I did. Walked in the room, and there he was, Fred MacMurray, up on the bandstand, sitting with the band playing a saxophone. Somebody brought him over. He sat down. He took my hand, and we both knew it was just to be. It was a wonderful, wonderful marriage. And it took a little doing to get him to teach me things that he knew how to do, because he was an expert golfer, a fisherman.
Fred was the best thing that ever happened to June Haver. And I must say probably the reverse is true too. The best thing that happened to Fred was June. She was very vivacious, loved songs, loved dancing, and that all you had to do is look at that beautiful face of hers and you'd break into a smile and she'd smile right back at you.
We were at a party, and there were lots of doctors. I cornered one, and I said, I cannot have children. But is there any possibility that we could adopt one? And they said, how does Fred feel about it? So Fred said, fine, if that's what you want. So I went home that night. I prayed. I called a sister, a nun that I know, and I said, would you make a novena with me? Novena is a Catholic prayer which takes 9 days in a row. I like to be a mother. And the sister said, certainly. It was May the 1st. May the 7th, I got a call from Fred. And I was at the hairdresser, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just ready to go under the dryer." He said, "Sit down. What are we going to do with twin girls that were born this morning?" And it was like, it didn't even take 9 days of prayer. In 7 days, they were to be ours. As an actor grows older, he kind of loses his place. He can't play a young, dashing, sophisticated person at cocktail parties and, wearing the tails and all that. All of a sudden, he finds these scripts being sent to him where he's playing Western leads.
Gentry, Fred MacMurray, a killer who had vowed never to kill again.
You're backing down? I'm backing down. What's the chance of a bullet in my bag?
Who are you, Gentry, to beg for dying this way?
I might just tell you.
I've never had the chance to choose before.
And he'd say, the darn horses never hit their marks. He was an outdoors man, but not a Western cowboy-type man.
Dad actually had thought of retiring in the 50s. We have a ranch in Northern California, and when he wanted to get away, he really got away. He loved to fly fish. He was a watercolor artist. He loved to paint. He had a workshop in our house where he did a lot of wood crafting.
Walt Disney approached him and he said, I'd kind of like to do a film with you. He said, I've got an idea. He had seen a scientific display by this sort of kooky professor that blew things up and had balloons and fires. And he said, I'd like to have a writer write something about this and call it The Absent-Minded Professor. Brad said, when do we start?
We were both cast in a picture called The Absent-Minded Professor. He knew exactly what he was doing all the time, and he did it so easily, so effortlessly. Therefore, a lot of times I think people didn't take him seriously. They thought, oh, well, that's Fred being Fred.
We've got to give it a name, Charlie. Let's see. Flying rubber. Flying rubber. Flubber? All right. Substance X. We dubbed the Flubber.
What was so truly funny about this absent-minded professor and his being so involved with this new substance, this anti-gravity stuff called flubber, I mean, it's a little hard to take that too seriously. But he made it absolutely real. And again, with extraordinary humor.
I suggest a meeting at the earliest opportunity that is convenient to you. Naturally, I shall make myself available at any time you should care to name. Since I regard this matter of the greatest importance.
Somebody said that the camera's ready. He got up, took his mark, and did something magical. He made all that flubber the most delightful thing that anybody's ever known. He got into the car and started driving through the sky. It was as natural as anything he'd ever done before.
I was preparing a picture called The Apartment. I had cast Paul Douglas, a very, very fine actor. And 4 days before we start shooting, Paul Douglas has a heart attack and dies. We have nobody. But there again is now the image of Fred MacMurray. He could play it. I go to him and say, oh, for Christ's sake, don't do it again. Not again. I cannot play that. I cannot play it because, you see, I have a deal with Disney. And at Disney, I'm playing a professor who's got that floating Volkswagen there in the air, and I am the hero of young people of kids of 5, 8, 10 years old. And now if I suddenly play a part where I have an affair with the elevator girl in my building, I can't do it. I just cannot do it. Came Monday, he did it.
You don't know what it's like standing next to you in that elevator day after day. Good morning, Miss Kubelik. Good night, Mr. Sheldrake. I'm still crazy about you, Fran.
Let's not start on that again, Jeff. Please. I'm just beginning to get over it.
I don't believe you.
Ingredient number 1, a very warm, very wonderful story about a boy, a girl, and a very special kind of problem. Jack Lemmon, Shirley MacLaine, Fred MacMurray. This is a Fred MacMurray you've never seen before.
You know, you see a girl a couple of times a week just for laughs, and right away they think you're going to divorce your wife. I ask you, is that fair?
No, sir, it's very unfair, especially to your wife.
Yeah.
I felt that he knew precisely what he was doing, but he was injecting a great deal of his own persona into the part, and that was the correct thing to do, and it certainly was what Billy wanted, because he wanted him to be attractive on the surface.
When you're in love with a married man, you shouldn't wear mascara.
It's Christmas Eve, Fran. Let's not fight, huh?
Merry Christmas.
What is it? Oh. Our friend at the Chinese restaurant. Thanks, Fran. We better keep it here.
Yeah, we better.
Oh, I have a present for you. I didn't quite know what to get you. Besides, it's kind of awkward for me shopping, so here's $100. You go and buy yourself something, huh?
Billy was criticizing a certain level, a certain strata of behavior in big business today, and with the love story of Shirley and me, he was growing a rose in a garbage pail, is what he was really doing. And a lot of that garbage was Fred's behavior as the character. Fred did play the part, and I thought he was wonderful.
He had done 2 or 3 films with Disney, and he had quite a reputation as the absent-minded professor and the dad image. Kate and Laurie were about 5 or 6 years old, and Fred and I took them out to Disneyland, and they were on the merry-go-round, and this lady came up to Fred with her little girl and said, "You're Fred MacMurray, aren't you?" And he said, yes. He was ready to sign the autograph, and she said, "You know, I've always loved you in all those Disney pictures. And because of that great reputation, I took my daughter to see the apartment. Shame on you. Now I just hate you." And she hit him with her pocketbook.
I guess he was in shock, but a lot of the fans in those days couldn't separate the real person from the character. That probably still goes on. And I heard it said that from that time on, he decided he would never play a heavy again.
He was about 50. Got a phone call from Don Feddersen, TV producer, and he said, "How would you feel about doing a TV series where you play the father? We've got Bill Frawley signed up. You'd have 3 sons, a womanless household."
And Fred said, "Well, that's wonderful, and I think it'd be great if you do the show, but I'm not going to do the show." He said, "Well, why?" He said, "Because I don't want to work that much. I love to go camping, and I love to go, I'm a sportsman. So I don't want to come to work every day for 6 to 7 to 8 months." And so Don said, "Well, let me ask you a question, Fred. If we could do this series in 3 months, would you do that?" And he said, "You can't do that. But if you can do that, I'm your man."
Sorry, fellas, I'm so beat I can hardly think, let alone talk.
Okay, we understand.
Man only has so many words to say every day, and I've already said mine. I'm talked out.
Sure, Dad, but think of all the...
And thought out.
What if I needed...
And pooped out.
But, Dad, all the trouble we went through... Quiet, you guys. Can't you see Dad's bushed? Dad, if you could just set a time for us to talk about... Pretty soon, please, Dad, because I'm broke, and if I don't get some money...
Me too. I need some more
Not so loud, Dumbo. Dad's tired. Pipe down, Robbie.
Quiet, all of you.
The producers had figured out a way to do a lot of his scenes right up front, and he would come in maybe for the first month, 6 weeks of the show, and we would do scenes with him. And they constructed a lot of scenes that he would enter into or walk out of on purpose. We would cut then, a cameraman would step in, take a picture, and we would come back, the other actors without Fred, and maybe pick up that scene if he had walked out of it maybe 2-3 months later. And by then, Fred would be off fly fishing somewhere. Because Fred wasn't there, they would pick up our close-ups. A lot of the times, like I said, we would be talking to Fred, and he would be off camera, and we'd be looking up. It wasn't really Fred. It would either be an assistant standing on an apple box, a dialogue coach, or a lot of times they had a mop. And because he was so tall, they'd have to hold it up. We used to call it Fred MacMop.
My Three Sons was a very unique show at that time in the 60s and early 70s. A show had never been done like that, where you had a father figure, a single parent, running a household and raising 3 boys alone with a dog and with his father-in-law.
It wasn't a show that was very preachy. It was interesting because the sons would always get involved in something where they were going to make a horrendous mistake with their lives. But because of Steve's great upbringing and the manners and I suppose the skills he had given us as people, you know, we would always disengage ourselves out of a situation before he would really need to step in, and he would always smile and look at his sons and say, you know, I've taught them, they've grown up with my values.
Those parts were written for him and for his persona, which was very fatherly and a very communicative father, which my father at home was. The only thing that was different was all the physical comedy. He didn't fall around the house a lot.
When Fred was shooting My Three Sons, it was on every Thursday night. Our daughters, they would be on either side of Fred on the couch. And when the music started, the theme song, they would run to the set and kiss him. Then they would run back and kiss him. Every week this went on for years.
They had no idea the show was going to go this long. Finally, they're in about their 9th year. They decided that they would have Fred MacMurray get married and have a wife. I walked in the first day, panicked, because everybody had worked together for 9 years, and they treated me like I was I'd been there forever. When I got the part of Barbara on My Three Sons, I just was so excited because Mary Tyler Moore was doing her show. She had a feistiness about her. She had wait a minute, let me tell you what I think. She became the new woman, in a sense, in sitcoms. And I thought, you know, now MacMurray's going to get a wife. I can do that. Instead of all this sweet apron, whatever you say, daddy dear. First day, Fred MacMurray's teaching me how to play golf on the lawn. And I don't do it right, and he tells me, and I don't. Finally, I say, but you said, didn't you tell me that if I'm not, I mean, come on. I mean, is that what you told me? They printed it. Next day, in come 5 men, gray suits, ties. They walk over to me. Beverly? Yes? You have to understand something. That Barbara is always sweet, always nice, always with a smile, never raises her voice. She is the wonderful, sweet, charming, lovely wife. Okay. Well, that was the end of that wonderful idea.
Dad was very involved in the substance of the shows, and he really did want the series to be about a father raising sons. I guess also he wasn't too eager for a TV wife to boss him around on a regular basis.
My Three Sons was a kind of projection of Fred at his best, because this was a man who had a great sense of humor and who loved being a father. And of course those were comedies, and yet there was always a little message to them about the kind of values that a family man should have.
Chip, why aren't you in bed?
Want a drink of water?
Well, go in the bathroom and get one, and then get to bed, will you, please?
Dad, how can you get to first base by striking out?
When the catcher drops the ball on the third strike.
How come Robbie says you're out on the first strike?
Well, I don't know what he meant by that, Chip. But I guess none of us know quite what we're saying tonight. Maybe we'll all feel better in the morning, huh? Good night.
Night, Dad.
Well, Chip, don't forget your drink of water.
Huh? Oh, yeah.
He left a kind of legacy with those television shows.
The roles that he took on, by and large, throughout his film career and his television career, was that of a father figure. He was a very caring and very loving father. And he didn't have that growing up. It's remarkable to me that he grew into such a wonderful father personally, and of course everyone remembers him professionally as America's durable and lovable father. They felt that they had been raised by him. He was in their household once a week for 12 years consecutively, and his fatherly advice was very pertinent to a whole generation of young people. My dad acted well into his 60s. He looked years younger than he actually was. And even as he got older, his interests and his hobbies never diminished. He loved to paint, he worked in his workshop, and he loved going up to our ranch in Northern California. He loved it there.
I think Fred MacMurray was the total professional. He was the kind of actor who could fit very well in the studio system context, where the studio expected you to be versatile. I think Fred would have had some problems in the Hollywood of today. I think that today you expect actors who are incredibly intense emotionally, the Robert De Niros, the Dustin Hoffmans, and others. And Fred was not that kind of actor. He made movies at a time when audiences truly valued the kind of stolidity, the kind of coolness that he had in front of a camera.
Fred, in a way, was overlooked. He never got an Academy Award nomination, let alone the Academy Award.
Members and people that belong to the Academy, where the Oscar comes from, will pick on a part that is a dynamic part, an outstanding part, which is usually the easiest kind to play. He never played dynamic parts because he wasn't a dynamic kind of person. However, if you gave an award just for doing a part beautifully, I think he would have gotten a few awards.
There is something mysterious about a movie star. It's not something you can learn. It's not something that you can borrow or watch somebody else and imitate. It is simply something there. And Fred was comfortable with it. He knew it was there. He knew that he could tap into it at any moment he wanted. And that's what made him so truly extraordinary.
This man was a trooper. He was a real professional in every possible sense of the word. For a guy who went out there for that long and just went through it and carved out such a marvelous niche for himself and did it in such a wonderful way, I think says something about the man.
Happily, television has given an immortality to film stars.
I remember when he was sick, when he took ill, and he felt himself going downhill. And it's sad, but I can sit here and watch him right there on the tube, young and healthy. Gosh, it's marvelous.